The first sensation was light. A milky, insistent light that pierced through her eyelids, pulling her from a deep and dreamless darkness. The second was confusion, a thick fog in her mind that made every thought slow and heavy. And the third, the most urgent of all, was a name. Ethan. I have to call Ethan. The thought was so clear, so instinctive, that her body reacted before her mind could process her surroundings. Amelia tried to sit up, the movement driven by an urgency she didn't understand. A sharp, searing pain shot through her head and down her entire right side, forcing her back against the pillows with a muffled groan. The room spun. The scent of antiseptic invaded her nostrils, and the rhythmic sound of an electronic beep finally registered in her consciousness. A hospital. Before panic could set in, the door to the room opened with a soft click. A man rushed in, not with the hurry of a doctor in an emergency, but with the urgency of someone who had been waiting for this exact moment. He was tall, with dark hair and strong features, but it was his eyes that held her. Eyes of a deep gray, filled with a relief so overwhelming it seemed to be on the verge of pain. "Amelia, you're awake," he said, his voice a hoarse, emotion-laden whisper. He stopped beside the bed, one hand outstretched as if to touch her, but he hesitated at the last second. Amelia stared at him, her heart hammering against her ribs. Every instinct in her body screamed that this man was a stranger. She searched her mind for any trace of recognition, any fragment of memory that could explain the familiarity with which he spoke her name. Nothing. Just a frightening void. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice weak and scratchy. The question seemed to hit him like a physical blow. The hope in his eyes faltered, replaced by an apprehension that stiffened his shoulders. "Where's Ethan? Does he know I'm here?" The man closed his eyes for a moment, taking a deep breath as if bracing for an impact. When he opened them again, the raw emotion had been replaced by a professional calm, a doctor's mask taking over. "My name is Michael Anderson," he said, his voice firmer now, though still gentle. "I'm your husband." The word husband hung in the sterile air of the room, absurd and impossible. Amelia felt a hysterical laugh bubble in her chest, but she swallowed it down. Husband? Her heart belonged to Ethan. They were in college, planning a future. She remembered his smile, the way his hair fell over his forehead, the sound of his laugh. She remembered falling asleep the night before in her dorm room, her head full of paper deadlines and the promise of a weekend together. "That's not possible," she whispered, shaking her head slowly, the movement sending another wave of pain through her. "I'm not married. I'm with Ethan." Michael pulled a chair close to the bed, his expression a mixture of patience and infinite sadness. "Amelia," he began, "you were in a serious car accident. You've been in a coma for almost 3 months." He paused, letting the information settle. "The accident, it caused a form of amnesia. You've lost the last 7 years of your life." 7 years. The number echoed in the emptiness of her mind. 7 years had vanished like smoke. To her, the year was 2018. She was a 21-year-old art student, in love. This man was telling her it was 2025, that she was 28, and that she was married to him. It was a nightmare. Seeing the disbelief and panic on her face, Michael gently took her left hand. On her ring finger, a white gold band with a small diamond glittered under the fluorescent light. A piece of jewelry she had never seen before. He then held up his own hand, where a matching white gold band rested. "We've been married for 5 years," he said softly. He picked up his phone, unlocked it, and opened the photo gallery. He turned the screen toward her. The first photo was from a wedding. There she was, in a simple white dress, smiling at the camera, her arm linked with Michael's. He looked younger, his face radiant with happiness. There were other photos, them on a beach, sand in their hair, in front of a snow-covered mountain, bundled up and laughing. On a couch, looking exhausted but happy, in a house she didn't recognize. It was like looking at someone else's life, an actress who happened to have her face. She felt nothing, no flicker of recognition, no spark of emotion. The woman in those photos was a stranger. He put the phone away, realizing the images weren't helping. "I know this is a lot to process," he said. "Your doctors will explain everything in more detail. The important thing is that you're safe. You're okay." Amelia looked away, unable to meet the painful sincerity in his eyes. Her mind clung to a single anchor in this ocean of confusion. Ethan. "I want to talk to him," she insisted, her voice a little stronger. Michael hesitated. "Amelia, please," she begged, and the vulnerability in her own tone surprised her. "If 7 years have passed, I need to know what happened. He was the most important person in my life. I need to know if he's okay." A shadow crossed Michael's face. He seemed to be fighting an internal battle, but finally, he relented. "All right," he said, sounding resigned. He picked up her phone from the bedside table and handed it to her. "Your contacts should all be in there." With trembling hands, Amelia took the device. It was a sleek, thin model she didn't recognize. Her clumsy fingers almost dropped it. She opened the contact list, her heart pounding. She ignored the name Michael, husband, at the top of her favorites list and scrolled down, searching for the letter E, and there it was. Ethan. A sigh of relief escaped her lips. He was still in her life. She tapped the name to call, but what she saw made her freeze. Next to the name, where the smiling photo she kept in her memory should have been, there was only a red circle with a line through it. A block icon. Blocked. The word made no sense. Why would she block the number of the love of her life? Her mind raced, trying to find a logical explanation. Maybe it was a mistake. Maybe Michael had done it. But the look on his face when he handed her the phone wasn't one of deceit. It was one of pity. Michael saw the confusion turn to anguish on her face. He stood up, the chair scraping softly on the polished floor. "Things have changed a lot in the last 7 years, Amelia," he said, his voice a gentle echo of the pain she was just beginning to feel. He moved toward the door. "I'm going to give you some space. Try to get some rest." He left, closing the door behind him and leaving her alone with the silence and the steady beep of the machine beside her. Amelia stared at the phone's screen, at that red icon that screamed a story she couldn't remember. A story where she had, for some unthinkable reason, decided to erase Ethan from her life. A single tear slid down her temple and lost itself in her hair. The man who called himself her husband was a stranger. The life he described was a fiction, and the only love she remembered having was blocked on her phone by her own hand. A terrifying question began to form in the fog of her mind. What, in the last 7 years, could have possibly led her to do such a thing? Michael took her home 2 days later. The word home felt like a lie, a label for a place she had no connection to. It was a modern house, beautiful and spacious, with large windows that overlooked a manicured garden. It was the kind of house she might have dreamed of as an art student, but standing in the entryway, she felt nothing but the cold, unnerving sense of being an imposter. "I'll show you around," Michael said, his voice gentle, as if he were speaking to a frightened animal. He led her through a living room with a sleek, minimalist fireplace and into a large, open-plan kitchen. Everything was pristine, clean, and utterly devoid of the creative chaos she remembered her life having. He led her upstairs to their bedroom. It was a large, airy room, painted in a calming shade of gray. A king-sized bed sat in the center, perfectly made. On her side of the bed, a stack of books sat on the nightstand. She didn't recognize any of the titles. "This is our room," he said, his voice soft. "Your studio is just down the hall. I haven't touched it. I left it just as it was." Amelia walked further into the room, a strange numbness settling over her. She opened a drawer in a tall dresser and found it filled with clothes she didn't recognize. Elegant blouses and tailored trousers, a style far more sophisticated than the ripped jeans and band t-shirts she remembered favoring. In the back of the drawer, tucked away beneath a cashmere sweater, she found an old iPod. It was a model from years ago, one she recognized instantly. It was hers. With trembling fingers, she searched for the small power button. The screen flickered to life, and she navigated to the music library. The first song on the most played list was one she knew by heart. It was their song, hers and Ethan's. She pressed play. The familiar melody filled the silent room, and with it came a tidal wave of memory. Not the blank, empty feeling of the last 7 years, but vivid, colorful memories. Lying on the grass in the campus quad with Ethan, sharing earbuds, dancing in his cramped apartment kitchen. The first time he'd told her he loved her, this song playing softly on the radio. The memories were so real, so potent, that they brought tears to her eyes. She sank onto the edge of the bed, clutching the small device, and wept for a love that, to her, was still alive and breathing. Downstairs, Michael tried to connect. He was endlessly patient, a quiet and steady presence in the house that felt too big for them. He cooked for her, preparing a salmon dish with roasted asparagus. "This is your favorite," he'd said, a hopeful smile on his face. She ate it politely, but the taste was foreign. Her favorite food was greasy pepperoni pizza. He told her about her job as a successful freelance graphic designer, showing her a portfolio of her work. Sleek corporate logos and website layouts that seemed created by a stranger's hand. He spoke of their friends, of weekend trips to the coast, of quiet nights spent reading side by side. He was kind, and a part of her, the logical part, felt a pang of guilt for the cold distance she couldn't seem to bridge. But her heart was a stubborn, unmoving thing, anchored firmly 7 years in the past. Every gentle gesture from Michael felt like a betrayal of the love for Ethan that was so vibrant in her mind. That evening, sitting alone in the quiet living room, she made a decision. It felt reckless, defiant, a rebellion against this new life that had been forced upon her. She took out her phone, her fingers hovering over Ethan's blocked contact. With a deep breath, she pressed unblock. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she typed a simple 3-word message. "It's me, Amelia." She sent it, a knot of anxiety tightening in her stomach. She didn't expect a response, not really. It had been 7 years. He had probably moved on, married someone else, forgotten all about her. She tossed the phone onto the couch cushion beside her, telling herself it was a foolish impulse. Minutes later, the phone buzzed. Her breath caught in her throat. She snatched it up. It was him. His name glowed on the screen. He was calling. With a shaking hand, she answered. "Leah." His voice. It was exactly as she remembered. That same smooth, charming tone that had always made her heart skip a beat. Hearing it was like a drink of water after days in the desert. "Ethan," she breathed, relief and sorrow mingling in her voice. "Oh my God, Leah, I heard about the accident. I've been going out of my mind," he said, his words tumbling out in a rush. "They wouldn't let me see you. He wouldn't let me anywhere near the hospital. Are you okay? Are you really okay?" I don't remember," she stammered, the confession feeling shameful. "I don't remember anything from the last 7 years." There was a pause on the other end of the line, a silence filled with unspoken meaning. Then, he spoke again, his voice dropping to an intimate whisper. "Maybe that's a good thing. Maybe it's a second chance for us." He paused again, before delivering the words she was longing to hear. "I never stopped loving you, Leah. Not for a single day." Tears streamed down her face, but this time, they weren't tears of confusion. They were tears of validation. She wasn't crazy. The love she felt was real. She was so lost in the moment, so wrapped up in the sound of his voice, that she didn't hear the front door open. She didn't hear the soft footsteps on the hardwood floor. She only looked up when Michael entered the living room, a bag of groceries in his arms. He stopped dead when he saw her, his eyes immediately falling to the phone clutched in her hand, to the tears on her face. He didn't have to ask who she was talking to. He knew. An expression of pure, unadulterated pain flashed across his face, so raw and unguarded that it made her flinch. It was there for only a second before the mask of calm composure slipped back into place. Amelia quickly ended the call, her face flushed with guilt. Michael said nothing. He simply walked into the kitchen, the silence between them heavy and suffocating. A few minutes later, he returned with a cup of tea, placing it on the coffee table in front of her. He didn't look at her. He looked at a spot on the wall just over her head. "He's not the man you remember, Amelia," he said, his voice flat and devoid of emotion. The warning was quiet, but it landed with the force of a shout. It hung in the air, a stark and ominous counterpoint to the sweet promises Ethan had just whispered in her ear. She was left with the echo of two different men, two different realities. One was the love she had never forgotten, the man who claimed he was waiting for her. The other was the husband she couldn't remember, a man whose eyes held a universe of pain and whose cryptic warning suggested a darkness she couldn't yet see. And she, Amelia, was trapped in the middle, facing a terrible, impossible choice. Amelia agreed to meet Ethan in a small cafe downtown, a place they used to frequent. The decision felt like a betrayal, a secret mission into her own past, and her hands trembled as she applied a touch of makeup, her reflection in the mirror still feeling like that of a stranger. Michael knew she was going out. He didn't ask where. He simply stood at the door as she left, his face a stoic mask that couldn't quite hide the storm in his gray eyes. "Be careful," was all he said. The moment she saw Ethan rise from a small table in the corner of the cafe, her breath caught. He was older, of course, the lines around his eyes a little deeper, his shoulders a little broader, but the easy smile was the same. It was the smile that had captivated her at 19, and for a moment, the last 7 years of blank space ceased to matter. This was real. He was real. "Leah," he breathed, pulling her into a hug that felt both wonderfully familiar and strangely foreign. "I can't believe you're here. You look exactly the same. Beautiful." The first hour was a dream. It was easy, comfortable. They fell back into their old rhythm, laughing as they reminisced about college professors and mutual friends. Ethan skillfully painted a picture of the last 7 years, a narrative where he was the victim and Michael was the villain. "He was always there, lurking in the background," Ethan said, his voice laced with a carefully crafted sorrow. "He was my friend, you know, or so I thought. He used your insecurities, a rough patch we were going through, and he twisted it. He convinced you I was bad for you. By the time I realized what was happening, he had sunk his claws in too deep. He stole you from me, Leah." Amelia absorbed every word, her mind desperately seeking a narrative that made sense. This one did. It was a classic story of jealousy and manipulation. It explained Michael's sadness, his possessiveness. It explained why she had blocked Ethan's number, because Michael had likely forced her to. It was so much easier to believe this than to accept that she had willingly walked away from the man sitting in front of her. They were deep in conversation when it happened. A young waitress, rushing between tables, stumbled, and the tray she was carrying tilted precariously. A glass of water slid off, shattering on the floor with a loud crash, splashing a few drops onto Ethan's expensive leather shoes. It was only for a fraction of a second, but the mask slipped. Ethan's charming smile vanished, replaced by a flash of ugly, unrestrained rage. His face contorted. "Are you an idiot?" he snarled, his voice a low, vicious hiss that cut through the cafe's gentle hum. "Look what you did. Just look!" The waitress, a girl no older than 20, flinched as if struck. Her face went pale, and her eyes filled with tears. I'm so sorry, sir, Just as quickly as it appeared, the fury was gone. Ethan's features softened back into a mask of concern. He turned to Amelia, forcing a light laugh. "Clumsy, aren't they? Don't worry about it." He gave the terrified waitress a dismissive wave. "It's fine, just clean it up." But Amelia had seen it, that fleeting moment of pure, cold cruelty. It was like a discordant note in a beautiful symphony, a flicker of a horror movie in the middle of a romance. It sent a chill down her spine, a disturbing sense of déjà vu that she couldn't place. She had seen that look before, that sudden, terrifying shift. Hadn't she? The rest of their meeting felt strained. The easy magic of the reunion had been broken. When she finally said her goodbyes, his charming smile didn't quite reach his eyes anymore. She returned home to a quiet house. She found Michael on the back porch, staring up at the night sky, which was just beginning to be pricked with stars. He didn't ask about her meeting with Ethan. He didn't say, "I told you so." He simply patted the empty space on the wooden bench beside him. She sat down, the silence stretching between them, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was peaceful. "See that one?" he said after a long moment, pointing upwards. "The 3 bright stars in a row, that's Orion's belt." He began to talk, his voice a low, steady murmur. He told her about the constellations, about the myths the ancient Greeks had created for them. He spoke of Orion the hunter, of his love for Artemis, of his eternal chase across the night sky. He wasn't talking about them, not directly, but Amelia felt a hidden meaning in the story, a tale of pursuit and longing. She listened, captivated. His voice was so calm, so soothing. It was the antithesis of the sharp, ugly hiss she'd heard from Ethan at the cafe. As he spoke, the knot of anxiety in her chest, the one that had been there since she woke up, began to slowly unwind. For the first time since opening her eyes in that hospital room, she felt a genuine sense of peace, a sense of safety. She looked at the man beside her, this stranger who was her husband, the man her mind rejected, the man she was supposed to see as a villain. Why then was he the only person who could make her feel safe? Why did his quiet presence feel more like home than a flood of memories of a love she thought was perfect? The paradox was maddening, and it left her more confused than ever. The sense of peace Amelia had felt with Michael on the porch was fleeting. It evaporated the next morning, leaving behind a residue of unsettling questions. Who was she supposed to believe? The man her memory loved, or the man her instincts were beginning to trust? Driven by a desperate need for answers, she found herself drawn to the one place she'd been avoiding, her art studio. Michael had kept his word. The room was a time capsule, untouched. Canvases were stacked against the walls, some covered in white sheets, others left bare. The air smelled faintly of turpentine and dried paint. It was here, she hoped, that she might find some piece of herself. She began to search, not knowing what she was looking for. She opened drawers, finding old sketchbooks filled with anatomical drawings and landscapes, the disciplined work of a student. It wasn't her recent life. Then she found it. Tucked away on a dusty shelf was a leather-bound journal. Her handwriting, a slightly more mature version of her own, covered the pages. It was from about 6 years ago, during the time she was still with Ethan, but, according to Michael's timeline, nearing the end. Her heart pounded as she opened it. The first few entries were filled with love, echoing the memories in her head. "Ethan surprised me with a weekend trip. He knows me better than anyone." But as she turned the pages, the tone began to shift. The entries grew shorter, more sporadic. The joyful loops of her handwriting became tight, sharp slants. "He was angry again tonight, over something stupid. He always says he's sorry afterwards. He doesn't like my new friend Sarah, says she's a bad influence. He wants me all to himself. He says it's because he loves me so much." The words sent a cold dread through her. These weren't the memories she had. This was a different story, a darker one. She flipped towards the end, her fingers trembling. The last entry wasn't a paragraph. It was a single, desperate sentence, pressed so hard into the page that the pen had almost torn through it. "I can't pretend this is love anymore." The sentence hung in the air, a stark confession from a version of herself she didn't know. It was proof. Proof that her perfect memory was a lie. She spent the next few days living a strange, double life. She continued to meet Ethan, but now his charm seemed rehearsed, his compliments hollow. She found herself watching him, waiting for the mask to slip again. He would shower her with gifts, a designer handbag, a delicate necklace, and talk endlessly about their future, a future where they would run away and leave this mess behind. Her time with Michael was the complete opposite. It was quiet, simple. There were no grand gestures or expensive gifts. Instead, he brought her a new sketchbook and a set of charcoal pencils. "I thought you might want to start again," he'd said, a simple statement that held a world of understanding. They cooked dinner together, their movements slowly finding a rhythm in the kitchen. He didn't push, he didn't demand. He simply existed alongside her, offering a silent, unwavering support that felt more valuable than any diamond necklace. The breaking point came on a Thursday afternoon. Ethan showed up at the house unannounced, his face lit with a manic excitement. He waved 2 plane tickets in front of her face. "Surprise," he announced, his voice booming in the quiet house. "I did it. 2 one-way tickets to Italy. We leave Saturday. Let's just go, Leah. We can leave all of this behind. Forget Michael, forget the last 7 years. We can start over, just you and me, like it was always supposed to be." The gesture was meant to be romantic, the ultimate fantasy of escape. But as Amelia stared at the tickets, a suffocating wave of panic washed over her. It wasn't excitement she felt. It was terror. And then it happened. Not a thought, but a memory, hitting her with the force of a physical blow. She's in their old apartment. A suitcase is open on the bed. Ethan stands in the doorway, his face dark with a possessive fury. "Where do you think you're going?" he snarls. "To see your family? I don't think so. You're not going anywhere without me." He grabs her arm, his fingers digging into her skin. She tries to pull away, and his rage explodes. He picks up a vase from the dresser, a gift from her mother, and hurls it against the wall. It shatters, the sound like a gunshot in the small room. "You are mine!" he screams, his face inches from hers. "You don't go anywhere without my permission." The memory was so vivid, so visceral, that she could almost feel the phantom pain in her arm and the spray of water from the shattered vase on her face. She stumbled backward, away from the real Ethan standing in front of her, his charming smile now looking predatory. I can't," she stammered, her voice barely a whisper. She couldn't breathe. The walls of the pristine living room felt like they were closing in. "What do you mean, you can't?" Ethan's smile faltered, a flicker of irritation crossing his face. "Don't be dramatic, Leah. This is what we want." But she wasn't listening. She turned and fled. She ran out the back door and into the garden, gasping for air, her heart trying to beat its way out of her chest. She didn't know where she was going, only that she had to get away from him. She ran until she reached the far end of the garden and collapsed onto a bench, shaking uncontrollably. She didn't know how long she sat there before she heard footsteps. It was Michael. He must have just gotten home. He stood a few feet away, his expression filled with alarm. "Amelia, what's wrong? What happened?" She couldn't form the words. Without thinking, without conscious thought, she launched herself off the bench and into his arms, burying her face in his chest. It was a desperate, primal instinct to seek safety. To her astonishment, his arms came around her immediately, holding her tightly, securely. He didn't say anything. He just held her, one hand stroking her hair as she trembled against him. "What happened?" he asked again, his voice a soft rumble against her ear. She pulled back just enough to look at him, her eyes wide with a mixture of terror and dawning realization. She choked out, the words catching in her throat. "I remembered something." Michael's arms tightened around her for a brief second, before he gently guided her back to the bench, sitting beside her. He didn't press, didn't demand to know what she'd seen. He simply waited, his presence a solid anchor in the swirling chaos of her mind. "It was Ethan," she finally whispered, her voice trembling as she stared at the pristine garden, the image of shattered ceramic sharp in her mind. He was angry. I think I was trying to leave just for a weekend, to see my parents. He wouldn't let me. He threw a vase against the wall. He screamed at me. She looked at Michael, her eyes pleading for him to tell her it was a nightmare, a false memory created by her damaged brain. But she saw in his face not surprise, but a deep, weary sadness. He already knew. "I'm so sorry you had to remember it that way, Amelia," he said, his voice thick with an old pain. "I'm so sorry you had to live it in the first place." His validation was a cold comfort, but it was the truth. The perfect love she had been clinging to was a fantasy. The man she remembered was a monster in disguise. After a few minutes of sitting in silence, letting her breathing return to normal, Michael stood up. "I think it's time you saw something," he said, his tone gentle but firm. "Something I should have shown you from the beginning. But you weren't ready. Maybe you are now." He led her back into the house. Ethan was gone. A profound sense of relief washed over her. Michael led her not to the living room or the kitchen, but to his home office, a room she hadn't yet entered. It was neat and organized, smelling of old books and clean paper. He unlocked a drawer in his desk and pulled out a thin manila folder. He held it for a moment, as if weighing its contents, before handing it to her. Her name was typed on the tab. Donovan, Amelia. With a sense of dread, she opened it. It was a medical file. Her medical file. The date on the top of the first page was from just over 7 years ago, a few months before her car accident. It was a report from the emergency room of the very hospital where Michael now worked. Her heart pounded in her ears as she read. Patient presented with pain and swelling in her right wrist, along with multiple contusions on her upper left arm. Patient states she fell down the stairs. She scanned down the page, her blood running cold. Diagnosis: hairline fracture of the distal radius. Bruising on the upper arm is inconsistent with a fall. The pattern of the hematomas is consistent with the shape of fingers, suggesting a forceful grip. She felt sick. She remembered that fall. She had been clumsy, she'd told everyone. She'd told herself. But it was a lie. It was the night after a big university party. Ethan had been drinking. He'd become jealous when she spoke to a male friend, and back in their apartment he had grabbed her, shaking her, his grip like a vice. He'd pushed her, and she had fallen hard against a table, her wrist taking the brunt of the impact. But the most shocking part of the report was at the very bottom of the page. Printed under the heading, Attending Physician, was a name that made her gasp. Dr. Michael Anderson, Resident Emergency Medicine. She looked up from the file, her eyes wide with disbelief, and met Michael's gaze. He had been there. He was the doctor who had set her wrist. He was the one who had seen her bruises, who had listened to her lie, his face professional, but his eyes full of a concern she had been too scared and ashamed to acknowledge at the time. He had seen her at her most broken, at her most vulnerable. He had known. "You knew," she whispered, the words barely audible. "The whole time. You knew." He nodded slowly, the weary sadness in his eyes deepening. "I knew," he confirmed, his voice quiet. "I knew you were lying, and I knew you were scared. I saw the way he hovered over you in the waiting room, the way you flinched when he touched you. I wanted to say something, to intervene, but I couldn't. All I could do was treat your wrist and write down what I saw in the report. And hope. I hoped that you would find the strength to leave." He took a step closer, his voice dropping even lower. "So I became your friend, Amelia. That's all it was, for a long, long time. I made sure to be there. I joined that book club you liked. I'd show up at the same coffee shop. I just wanted to be a safe place in your orbit. A person you could turn to if you ever decided you were ready." The revelation was staggering. It recontextualized everything. He wasn't a jealous rival who had swooped in and stolen her. He was a quiet guardian, a protector in waiting. He hadn't pursued her romantically. He had offered her a lifeline. She looked from the medical report in her hands to the man standing before her, A man who had seen the ugliest parts of her past and had chosen not to run, but to stay. To wait. "You waited for me," she said, the realization dawning on her with the force of a sunrise. "Always," he replied softly. The truth was finally out, raw and painful. But it was the truth, and it changed everything. The question that now hung in the air was no longer about what had happened in her past, but what he had done for her, and why. The revelation left Amelia breathless, adrift in a sea of rewritten history. Michael wasn't the villain. He was the hero she hadn't recognized. While she was processing this earth-shattering truth, the sound of a car door slamming outside broke the heavy silence. A moment later, the doorbell rang, sharp and insistent, followed by an aggressive pounding on the door. "Amelia, I know you're in there! Open this door!" Ethan's voice, stripped of all its charm, was a harsh, demanding bark. Michael's entire demeanor shifted. The gentle, patient man was gone, replaced by someone fiercely protective. He moved to stand slightly in front of Amelia, a silent shield. "You don't have to see him," he said, his voice a low, steady command. But Amelia shook her head. The fear was still there, a cold knot in her stomach, but it was now mixed with something else, a slow, burning anger. "No," she said, her own voice surprising her with its firmness. "I do." Michael nodded once, a flicker of pride in his eyes, and went to the door. He didn't open it wide, but just enough to block the entryway with his body. Ethan stood on the doorstep, his face flushed, his eyes wild. "Where is she?" he demanded, trying to push past Michael. "What have you been telling her? What lies have you been feeding her to turn her against me?" "She doesn't want to see you, Ethan," Michael said, his voice dangerously calm. He didn't raise his voice, yet he seemed to grow larger, an immovable object protecting his home. "Like hell she doesn't," Ethan scoffed, finally spotting Amelia standing in the hallway behind Michael. His expression shifted, attempting to morph back into one of a wounded lover. "Leah, baby, don't listen to him. He's twisting everything. We had something special, you know we did." This time, Amelia didn't stay silent. She stepped forward, moving to stand beside Michael, the medical file still clutched in her hand like a talisman. "Was it special when you broke my wrist, Ethan?" she asked, her voice shaking but clear. Ethan froze, his face paling. "What? I never... You fell. You were clumsy, you always were." "No," Amelia said, the pieces of her past now clicking into place with terrifying clarity. "I didn't fall. You pushed me, just like you threw that vase. Just like you'd locked me in the apartment when you were angry. The memories, they're coming back." Flashes of his jealousy, of his controlling behavior, of her constant fear of saying or doing the wrong thing. It was all rushing back, a torrent of suppressed trauma. Cornered, exposed, Ethan finally dropped the act. The mask didn't just slip. It shattered completely, revealing the ugly, entitled rage beneath. "So what?" he spat, his voice dripping with venom. "After everything I did for you, I gave you everything. You were nothing before you met me. You were mine. You owe me." He took an aggressive step forward, his hand raised as if to grab her. In a flash, Michael moved, placing himself squarely between them. He didn't touch Ethan. He didn't have to. His presence was a solid wall, a silent, absolute no. And in that instant, as Michael stood as her protector, the final, most important memory of all came crashing back. It wasn't a memory of fear or pain. It was a memory of salvation. She's in her car, parked a block away from her apartment, rain lashing against the windshield. She's crying, her body trembling with a mixture of terror and resolve. She has just left him. For good. Her phone is in her hand, and she scrolls through her contacts, past her parents, past her friends. Her finger hovers over one name. Michael. She presses call. He answers on the first ring. "I left him," she sobs into the phone. "I finally did it, but I'm scared. I don't know where to go." His voice on the other end is the calmest sound she has ever heard. "Stay right where you are. I'm coming." 20 minutes later, his car pulls up beside hers. He gets out and comes to her window, his face etched with concern. He doesn't ask questions. He just says, "Come on, you can stay with me." She gets into his car, and as he drives away, leaving her old life behind in the rearview mirror, she looks over at him, at his kind, steady profile. And she remembers thinking, with a clarity that felt like the first breath of fresh air after years of drowning, "I'm safe. I'm finally safe." The memory was so powerful it brought tears to her eyes. She looked at Michael, who stood guarding her now, just as he had then. She looked at Ethan, a pathetic, angry man who was a stranger to her now. "It was you," she whispered, her voice filled with awe and wonder. She was speaking to Michael. "It was always you. I chose you." Ethan stared at her, his mouth opening and closing, but no words came out. He saw the look on her face, the finality, the absolute certainty. He saw that he had lost. With a final, guttural sound of pure frustration, he turned, stormed back to his car and sped away, tires screeching. Amelia and Michael were left standing in the doorway, the sudden silence deafening. The truth, in all its painful and beautiful complexity, was finally laid bare between them. She remembered everything now. She remembered the abuse. She remembered her escape. And she remembered falling, slowly and surely, for the quiet, kind doctor who had saved her in more ways than one. But now that the past was no longer a mystery, a new, daunting question arose. With the weight of all that history between them, how could they possibly move forward? The departure of Ethan didn't bring the relief Amelia expected. Instead, it left a vacuum, filled with the heavy, unspoken weight of 7 years. They stood in the hallway, no longer a patient and a caregiver, or a woman with amnesia and her mysterious husband, but two people who shared a deep, complicated history that one of them was only just beginning to understand. The dynamic had irrevocably shifted. The next day, an awkward silence settled over the house. Michael made coffee, and they sat at the kitchen island, the space between them feeling wider than ever. He wasn't her caretaker anymore, but he wasn't quite her husband either. He was the man she had fallen in love with, the man she had chosen, but she couldn't simply step back into a life she had no emotional memory of living. Michael, ever perceptive, seemed to understand this. He looked at her over the rim of his coffee mug, his gray eyes serious. "I lied to you, Amelia," he said, his voice quiet but clear. The confession startled her. "When you woke up, I was selfish. I was so terrified of losing you, so scared of causing you more pain by making you remember Ethan, that I took a shortcut. I tried to force a past on you instead of giving us a chance to build a future. I'm sorry." He pushed his chair back and stood up. "So let's do this right, the way we should have from the beginning." He extended a hand to her. "My name is Michael Anderson. I'm a neurosurgeon who loves old books and has a terrible habit of leaving my coffee mugs all over the house. And I am completely, hopelessly in love with you." He took a breath, a nervous energy about him that she had never seen before. "Amelia Donovan, would you do me the honor of going on a date with me tonight?" A slow, genuine smile spread across Amelia's face for the first time in what felt like an eternity. The gesture was so thoughtful, so perfectly attuned to what she needed, that it made her heart ache with affection. It wasn't about erasing the past, but about respecting it enough to start anew. "I would love that, Michael Anderson," she replied, her voice soft. Their first date was nothing like the life she had seen in the photographs. He didn't take her to a fancy restaurant they supposedly loved. He took her to a small, bustling Thai restaurant she'd never been to. There were no assumptions. No, "you always order this." Instead, he asked her what she liked, what she was curious about. They talked for hours, but they didn't talk about Ethan, or the accident, or the hospital. They talked about their dreams. She told him about her half-forgotten passion for painting, and he listened, truly listened, asking her what she loved to paint and why. He told her about the challenges of his job, the immense pressure, but also the profound reward of helping people. She discovered she loved the way his eyes lit up when he talked about a complex surgical case, the way he laughed, a deep, genuine sound that crinkled the corners of his eyes. She was getting to know him all over again. Or maybe, she thought, she was truly getting to know him for the first time, without the shadow of her past trauma hanging over them. This wasn't the quiet, sad man who had been her caretaker. This was a vibrant, intelligent, passionate man, and she found herself falling for him, not because of a shared history, but because of the person he was, right here, right now. Later, he walked her to the front door of the house. The porch light cast a warm glow around them. There was a moment of sweet, awkward tension, the kind that precedes a first kiss. But Michael didn't lean in. Instead, he looked at her, his expression serious but incredibly tender. "I want you to choose me every day, Amelia," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Not because you remember choosing me 7 years ago, but because you want to choose me now for yourself." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a key. "This is a key to a small apartment downtown. It's paid for the next 6 months. I rented it last week." Amelia stared at him, stunned. "You can stay here," he continued, "or you can go there. You can have your own space, your own life. No pressure, no expectations. The choice is completely yours." He was giving her back the control that Ethan had stolen from her, the control that his own well-intentioned lie had inadvertently taken away. He wasn't just opening a door for her. He was giving her the freedom to walk through it, or to choose another one entirely. Amelia watched him go, her heart swelling with a love so profound it almost hurt. He wasn't just the man who had saved her from her past. He was the man who was giving her a future, one that she could build on her own terms. She went inside, the key feeling heavy and significant in her hand. She walked through the silent house, a house that was supposed to be hers, and went straight to the studio. For the first time since she had woken up, she didn't feel like an intruder. She uncovered a blank canvas, set it on the easel, and picked up a piece of charcoal. She didn't paint the past. She didn't paint the darkness or the fear. She began to sketch the outline of a future, her hand moving with a purpose she hadn't felt in years. The question was no longer about which house to live in. It was about what kind of life she was going to build, and who she was going to build it with. A week passed. It was a week of quiet transformation. Amelia spent her days in the studio, the scent of paint and charcoal becoming a familiar comfort. She filled sketchbooks, not with the ghosts of her past, but with the vibrant life she saw around her. The way the morning light hit the garden, the intricate patterns of a leaf, the face of the man who gave her space but always left a fresh cup of coffee outside her studio door before he left for the hospital. Michael kept his promise. He gave her space, sleeping in the guest room to give her the master bedroom to herself. He was a gentle presence in the house, a partner, not a keeper. They continued to have first dates, a walk in the park, a visit to a modern art museum, a night spent watching a terrible old movie and laughing until their sides hurt. They were slowly, carefully, building a bridge back to each other, a bridge built on new memories, not old obligations. On Saturday morning, Michael came home from a long 24-hour shift at the hospital, looking exhausted. He walked into the living room and stopped short. The room was filled with cardboard boxes. His heart sank. For a terrifying moment, he thought she was leaving. He thought that despite everything, she had chosen the apartment, chosen a life without him. "I made a decision," Amelia said, emerging from the kitchen. She saw the look on his face and a soft, reassuring smile touched her lips. She took his hand and led him to the boxes. "These are for donation," she said. He looked inside and saw the remnants of a life that was no longer hers. The designer handbag from Ethan, the clothes from her married life that never felt like her own, the books she didn't remember reading. She was not just cleaning house. She was clearing out the ghosts. Then she led him to the studio. The room was transformed. It was no longer a dusty time capsule, but a bright, living space. Her new sketches and paintings were pinned to the walls, bursting with color and emotion. And on the main easel, facing the door, was a finished painting. It was a portrait of him. But it wasn't the serious, pained Dr. Anderson she had first met. It was the Michael she knew now. He was in his scrubs, leaning against a doorway, a small, tired smile on his face, his eyes filled with a gentle, loving light. It was a picture of a man at rest, a man at home. "I don't need a new place," she said, her voice soft but sure as she stood beside her creation. "I realized my home isn't a house, Michael. It's you." She turned to face him, her eyes shining with a clarity and confidence that he hadn't seen since she woke up. "I know I might never get all the memories back. I know there are still blank spaces, but it doesn't matter anymore." She stepped closer, reaching up to gently touch his face, her thumb tracing the tired line beside his mouth. "My head might not remember every detail of the last 7 years," she said, "but my heart does. It remembers your kindness. It remembers your patience. It remembers that you were the man who taught me what it felt like to be safe. My heart remembers you." He closed his eyes, a single tear escaping and tracing a path down his cheek. All the fear, all the desperate loneliness he had felt for months while she was in the coma, finally washed away, replaced by a wave of overwhelming love. When he opened his eyes, she was still there, her gaze unwavering. And then she rose on her toes and kissed him. It was not a kiss of desperation or confusion. It was not a kiss born of a lie or a half-remembered past. It was a kiss of choice, of certainty. It was a kiss that sealed a new beginning, a promise of a future they would build together day by day. She pulled back slightly, resting her forehead against his. "My name is Amelia Donovan," she whispered, her voice full of a strength she had reclaimed as her own. "And I am the woman who loves you." Michael wrapped his arms around her, holding her as if he would never let go, the scent of her hair and the paint from her studio filling his senses. The long, painful chapter of waiting was over. Their memories of the past might be fractured, but the love they felt in that moment was whole and perfect. It was strong enough to build a lifetime of new ones, starting today. Of course. An epilogue is the perfect way to provide that satisfying sense of closure and bring the story to the 1-hour mark. This chapter will jump forward in time, showing the lasting impact of their journey and reaffirming their love. 1 year later. The gallery was buzzing, a low hum of conversation and clinking glasses filling the bright, open space. Canvases lined the white walls, each one a riot of color, emotion, and light. At the center of it all stood Amelia, not as a patient or a victim, but as the artist. It was the opening night of her first solo exhibition, Anamnesis. She moved through the crowd, greeting friends and strangers, her smile easy and genuine. She wore a simple dark blue dress, and on her left hand, the white gold wedding band Michael had given her no longer felt like a prop from a stranger's life. It felt like hers. From across the room, she saw Michael watching her. He was leaning against a far wall, a glass of wine in his hand, simply observing. He wasn't hovering or being protective. He was just her husband, quietly proud, giving her the space to shine. Their eyes met, and a silent conversation passed between them, one of love, of pride, of a shared journey that had brought them to this incredible moment. A well-known art critic, a woman with sharp eyes and a sharper pen, approached Amelia. "Ms. Donovan, your work is extraordinary," the critic began. "There's a fascinating tension in it, a battle between shadow and light, and your centerpiece." She gestured to the largest painting in the collection, the one hanging in the most prominent position. It's titled The Choice. It's a portrait, but of 2 men, almost superimposed. One is in shadow, his features contorted in rage, while the other is stepping into the light, his hand outstretched. "Tell me about the inspiration behind it." Amelia looked at the painting. It was the most difficult and most honest piece she had ever created, It was the culmination of her journey, the darkness of her past with Ethan, and the light she had found with Michael. "I believe," Amelia said, choosing her words carefully, "that we are all made of our memories. But sometimes we get to choose which memories define us. We can live in the shadows of the ones that hurt us, or we can choose to step into the light of the ones that saved us. That painting, it's about the moment you realize you have that choice." The critic nodded slowly, a look of deep appreciation on her face. A powerful concept. Later, after the last of the guests had departed, Michael helped her pack up a few of her things. The gallery was quiet now, the paintings like sleeping sentinels on the walls. "You were amazing tonight," Michael said, wrapping his arms around her from behind as she stared at the choice. "I've never been more proud." "We did it," she whispered, leaning back against his chest. "We got here." "You got here, Amelia," he corrected gently. "You did the work. You fought the battles." "I wasn't alone," she said, turning in his arms to face him. "Never." They stood in silence for a moment, simply holding each other. The past year had been one of healing and rediscovery. There were still gaps in her memory, foggy patches and missing days that would likely never return. But they had ceased to matter. They had filled those gaps with new memories. They had gone on that trip to Italy, not as an escape, but as a celebration. They had adopted a clumsy golden retriever who now filled their home with chaos and joy. She had learned that Michael was a terrible singer, but an excellent dancer, and he had learned that she left paint smudges on nearly every surface of their house. They had built a life, a real, tangible, beautifully imperfect life. "Do you ever wonder?" she asked softly, her fingers tracing the lapel of his jacket. "If the accident had never happened?" Michael considered the question. "Sometimes," he admitted. "I wonder if we would have found our way to each other anyway. I like to think we would have. But I don't dwell on it, because the woman I fell in love with all those years ago, she was strong and kind and brilliant. But the woman standing in front of me right now," he said, his voice thick with emotion as he cupped her face in his hands, "she's all of those things. But she's also a survivor. She's the bravest person I've ever met. I wouldn't change a single thing that led me to you, right here, right now." His words were the final piece, the healing balm on a scar she would always carry, but that no longer ached. She smiled, her eyes shining with tears of pure happiness. "Good," she said, "because I remember everything I need to." And she did. She remembered the color of his eyes on the worst day of her life. She remembered the steady calm of his voice over the phone. She remembered the feeling of his hand in hers on their first date. She remembered the safety of his arms. She remembered love, and that was more than enough. "Let's go home," she whispered, and pulling his face down to hers, she gave him a kiss that held no questions and no lingering shadows, only the bright, vibrant promise of tomorrow.